Meet Kodac Harrison, singer, songwriter, and poet who's been described as a Southern Tom Waits or a rural Leonard Cohen.
Kodac has been releasing albums for 40 years, but after a life-threatening injury, he changed his perspective. And not only did he help his own career, but he began to help other artists in Atlanta as well.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Joe Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go. So welcome to the show, Kodac Harrison.
It's good to be here. You want me to tell you who I am?
Yes, all right. So we're about to put you on the clock.
Give me a sec.
Billy?
All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, go.
I am Kodac Harrison. I am a singer, songwriter, spoken word artist, etc. I've got 20 releases over a long time, 40 years. And I've got a new CD coming out, which is basically built around the theme of my love of soul music. I'm doing 3 covers out of 14 songs on this. I've never done over one. Most of my releases are totally original. This one will have 4 covers on them, because then there are songs that I do that fit the theme, which is basically the title of this CD is Love and Soul.
Look at that.
Had 20 seconds left.
Oh,
Nice.
I went under time. Eh? That's unusual. I don't usually go under time. I usually go over. I've done a lot of poetry slams, and recently I was in the Atlanta Championship Slam for the Moth Slam. To be eligible for the Grand Atlanta Championship, you had to win a monthly Moth Slam, which I did. And I competed over there at the Alliance Theater recently for that. So, done all kind of things in my career, including tours to Europe and all over this country.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess we'll take it back away. So how did you first get into music?
Oh, wow. I bought an album when I was, we're going way back now. It's 65. I got bought an album by the Rolling Stones. One of the songs on there was called That's How Strong My Love Is. According to the liner notes on the back, it was an Otis Redding song. He didn't actually write it, but they gave it credit to him. And then I realized, Otis Redding lives 45 miles south of me. So I went to my first concert, which was an Otis Redding homecoming show. I loved it. I had a lot of sadness in my childhood. My father died when I was 9, and I needed a way to release my emotions. I had a lot of pent-up emotions. And it took a while for me to figure that out, but that's what led me to music and singing, and hopefully, and later on, spoken word and other things such as that.
So, but you kind of got into your musical career a lot later than you didn't just start right away.
Absolutely. I learned a little bit in high school, but then gave it up and went to Georgia Tech. I was on scholarship. As a senior at Tech, I picked up guitar again and have been playing continually since then. So I got kind of a late start, and I guess coming from Jackson, small town, halfway between Atlanta and Macon, and I always say my influences are halfway between Atlanta and Macon. And my musical hero is Otis Redding because of the first concert, and my philosophical spoken word hero would be Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated when I was a freshman at Georgia Tech. And that kind of shook me up, opened my awareness, so to speak. And I started late, and I went to New Orleans. That's one thing that New Orleans would do to you. I went there to get my MBA, thinking I'd get into the music business because I was in love with music. And New Orleans kind of went there trying to do what other people wanted me to do. And I left there determined to do what I wanted to do, and that was to play music. And by the time I got out of the Army, I was in California. I've been playing guitar regularly since then, and immediately got a gig in California, in Salinas, California, a place called East of Eden. I'm a big John Steinbeck fan, and that's where my musical career started before I came back to the East Coast, etc.
So what did you go to Georgia Tech for?
I got a scholarship predicated on my major in textiles. When I was a kid, after school and in the summer holidays, I worked in textile mills when I wasn't playing football, and I got a scholarship uh, sponsored by one of those textile mills, Avondale Mills. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how I could do it. So I went to school. I knew one thing I didn't want to do was work in a textile mill, which I had done, like I said, after school and the holidays. But that gave me something that got me to tech, which I needed the scholarship, and started playing guitar to senior tech, and then everything changed after that.
So did you get a real job out of college, or did you just
No.
go straight into music? No?
No, other than being in the Army, I was an Army officer for a couple of years. That's kind of a real job.
Yeah.
But after I got out of the Army, I started playing music and have done various different things to support my art over the years. But mainly have been playing music professionally ever since that first gig in 1975.
Wow.
I'm curious to know what songs you played in 1975. I'm guessing there were some covers in there.
Oh, lots of covers. I got an old song list. I collect these photo albums, which are like photo journals or life in pictures or whatever you want to call them. And in one of them, I found a set list of about 50 songs that I did back in those days. And there were a lot of singer-songwriter stuff that I was doing in additional. I had just started writing songs at that time.
So no, your style has like changed over a while because like some of your early stuff is very kind of similar at the time. I think it was like late '80s when you kind of got in it. There was some,
Actually, it was early 80s, but we'll go with
okay,
that.
early '80s. Yeah, I know it's
My first album came out, my first little record came out in 81. My first album came out in 84.
Oh wow! So like
I'd gone
you're
to New York for a very short period of time in 82, and I was doing an open mic down in the village at a place called Kenny's Castaways. And the host told me, said, "You need to put together a band and record an album." And I was like, wow, I don't know how I would do that in New York City. Where would we practice? I don't know any musicians, but I can do that in Atlanta. So I hightailed it back to Atlanta and did exactly that. Put together a band and recorded my first album, which came out in 84. I recorded 3 albums in the 80s, and they all contained strictly original music. I'm not going to compare myself to anybody, but yeah, I call it beatnik blues because it's kind of based in blues, but it's more beatnik poet ish. And it depends. People ask me a lot of times what kind of style I play in, and I said it depends on the band. If you got a full band with 2 electric guitars, drums, and bass, and it's kind of rock, throw in a saxophone, it gets jazzy a little bit, and it gets a little bit more R&B ish. When you play solo, it sounds more like a folk or something. And people have a critic once called it folk soul. I'll go with that. Beatnik blues, folk soul, something like that.
So you said that Otis Redding was one of your major influences, and then you went to New Orleans. So do you feel like the New Orleans time, how long were you there, and how much did that influence you?
I was there 2 years, and that's when I first met my first people who became lifelong musicians. And I hung around with them all the time and that's where I got my nickname Kodac, was in New Orleans. And so New Orleans, I kind of got into that musician's lifestyle and that whole feel of blues and jazz. And it just seemed like it just oozed from the pavement down there. And New Orleans is a very free town, especially in those days. It still is, I reckon. But and it kind of freed me up. I felt like I was, still living in Jackson otherwise, but after New Orleans kind of freed me from that. Even though I'd been in Atlanta for 4 years and saw a lot of music in Atlanta and also in New Orleans. Speaking of Macon, I became a big Allman Brothers fan and saw them 6 times before Dwayne died. So that's where I get that Macon influence. The Otis, the Allman Brothers, and the Atlanta is more of a sophisticated, poetic, spoken word influence, such as Martin Luther King and others. Yeah.
So, well, you've like been around enough to watch, like, see Atlanta evolve from like where it was in the '80s, where it was kind of, it wasn't like Atlanta the way people think of it now, where it's like now they're like the eyes of the whole country is here because of Hollywood and then like political stuff. Back in the day, it was probably one of those like second, third tier, big cities
Well,
that.
it seemed to me that in the 80s, everybody was trying to sound like a band from somewhere else. That wasn't necessarily true in Athens or in Macon, but in Atlanta it was. I always said if you could make it in Macon, if you could make it in Atlanta and Athens, then you really had it going. A few bands have done that in the early days because they had different attitudes. Atlanta, everybody was trying to be a little bit more professional, sound like you were from New York or London or L.A. And in Athens they just were loose and goosey and not so professional, but inspired amateurism, I like to say. So if you put the two together, then you got something. And it took a while for Atlanta to learn that lesson. But after the bands from Athens started becoming successful, Atlanta took on some of those things. Not that there weren't already bands like Bruce Hampton bands and other bands in Atlanta that were original and different, Smoke or different people, but overall, the music in Atlanta was a little more professional. I don't want to use the word professional because that depends on the end of your situation, how you become professional. I mean, you get paid to do it. Certainly, people in Athens got paid to do it eventually, but a little more sophisticated or something. And not really so sure about who they were as an Atlanta band. You had to be from Macon or Athens to be considered a band from that area. Anyway, I don't know that that's totally true, but somewhat.
So like so with you kind of, again, you're starting out midway between Macon and Atlanta, then you're traveling to New Orleans. Like, how is your style evolving during that time? Because you've always because I've followed you forever. So you never seem to be someone who got locked in a particular style, but I'm sure there's like an evolution
I started
there.
late, and I figured that my only chance because about once John Lennon, when he was 21, said, "I'm too old. You have to be 17." Well, with that attitude, I didn't have a chance. So I figured the only chance I had to be was be original, to be myself. So I've always tried to do exactly that, and not necessarily copy any other style, but create my own style. And people have compared me to different people, Tom Waits, etc., because I have that kind of voice. Um, Certainly during the days when all the smoky bars and people smoking everywhere, my voice got kind of ragged during those times. I never have been a smoker, but when you sing, you breathe a lot, and you're in a smoky bar, you might as well be smoking. I remember once I was playing in Europe, and the smoke was so thick. It was a small club. Smoke was so thick you couldn't see the audience. It was
Wow.
just unbelievable. And if you sing in those situations, you might as well be smoking several packs a day, the way I look at it. So my voice is kind of Tom Waitsy. I love the saxophone, so I got compared to bands that had saxophone, including Springsteen or something. And I had that kind of beatnik blues kind of storytelling, street poetry sound in
So
the lyrics. I've always been a lyric person. I know that most songwriters write the music, and you listen to the Beatles and Paul McCartney would say he just make up words because their focus is on melody, and then they put the polish the words in. I always wrote words first, which is goes back to my critics started calling me a poet, and I was like, no, I'm not a poet. I'm a songwriter in the '80s, but finally I kind of accepted that label later on. Uh, so I always wrote words first, and therefore I think probably one of my weak points is melody. For that reason.
well, that's not a bad place to be, though. I mean, Dylan's a poet. And Leonard Cohen's a poet, right? Like they were.
Exactly, exactly. And most critics are writers, and they love people that focus on writing lyrics. I find that to be true. Therefore, I've gotten a lot of good reviews over the years. And I always wonder, well, it doesn't translate to sales or audiences or any of that to get great reviews. I certainly appreciate them and love them. Don't I'm not asking for bad reviews by any means, but I feel like critics a lot of times go for writers uh, because they aren't because they're writers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
So,
makes sense. Go
so
ahead.
why were you so resistant to that poet label early on? Was it just you
Uh,
just didn't like
I didn't.
the
I
literary pressure of it?
I've got a lot of education at Tech and at Tulane, but I never studied any kind of literature. So I didn't. I put poets on a pedestal that was I thought was pretty unreachable from my point, and also, you know, I didn't study poetry, so I don't know about different forms or the history of poetry, or I didn't read that much poetry. I read a lot of lyrics. I read a lot of fiction, a lot of books, Steinbeck, etc. But I didn't. So I was like, well, I don't know exactly what that is, and I don't think that is me. So I resisted that label because I didn't know exactly what that was. I still don't know exactly, but you know, got an idea. I accepted the label later on uh, as people started calling me a poet and doing a lot of stuff in the world of poetry in Atlanta. I've been very involved in the Atlanta poetry scene at Java Monkey and other places, but initially I didn't look at myself as a poet.
So my curiosity is, so obviously you've had a long and very productive career, but back in the early days, I mean, music has never been an easy thing to get into. You make it sound like it was easy. So I'm just curious, like when you were
Oh,
starting
that's
out,
not nothing easy about it.
but like
I
what
mean,
were your days
especially
like?
if you
How did
want to,
you
if
do
you
it?
want, I mean, I could do it, but getting into the industry is another whole thing. I had to figure out a way to be an original artist without uh, that kind of support from the industry. So that made it very difficult to continue on. It takes a lot of determination, etc. I believe I've had a little of that, and I'm still doing it after all these years. But um, I've never made it. I've never, I'm not rich and famous. So
Well,
my
not
my my success is more determined by longevity.
right, but not rich and famous, but at the same time, you said that you've never had to have a day job, and you've so a lot of people can't seem to make that work, and so I'm just curious
Well,
how you made it work.
I've never had a day job, but I did paint a few houses along the way and worked for myself as a house painter, and that uh, kind of turned out to be beneficial. For instance, Rodney Mills, a Hall of Fame producer, engineer, etc. Um, I became his kind of personal painter on his house in exchange for music time, mixing time, mastering time in his studio. So I parlayed that into, uh, exactly ways to keep my career going, and also it enabled me to take off and go on tour or do an interview like this. If I was working a day job, I did try teaching school a little bit, but I never taught a full year, and I never, became a full time teacher. I don't have an education degree, but they did ask me to finish out the year a couple of times. Once at my old high school, that was a trip, but I finished out 4 months at the end of the year, and they wanted me back the next year, but I was like, no, I'm not going to commit to anything on a regular basis other than that. Um, I did. I also taught at SCAD. I did. I was a guest speaker in the music appreciation class. I did these three once a quarter, three 2.5 hour classes on the history of rock and roll, and that's right up my alley. Uh, so that was kind of. But besides the house paying, a little bit of teaching here and there. I pretty much been a musician. I've uh, done some permanent things, like once a week at Java Monkey lasted 18 years. I did it for 15 and a half years. Started it. It was a poetry reading. So, and that was a steady income, not much, but it was there. It was something I could count on every week. Things like that.
So, was there any point when do you feel like there was any turning point or pivot point where you could have gone one completely different direction and you chose your path?
Um, well, yes. There were two big crossroads in my life. When I got out of the Army, and I started playing music in California, I applied to Berkeley outside of San Francisco, across the bay there, not Berkeley in Boston, but to go to graduate school in music, and I was accepted. And I would go on the GI Bill, and I had planned to move to San Francisco, Berkeley, or somewhere. But I was kind of like, I've been involved in institutions, at Tech, at Tulane, in the Army, and I was just sick of institutions because I consider myself more like a folk blues musician, self-taught, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then Brandon's dad called me, and he said, "Why don't you come back and sing in my wedding?" In the meantime, I was living with another friend of ours, who were three of us who was the same age. We were real close. Charles Starr, who lived next door to me and was kind of like a brother. He wasn't he had no reason to go to San Francisco, and so on the spur of the moment, we decided to go back east instead of going to San Francisco. That was one crossroads. The next one came in New York when I was up there for a couple of months, and I'd had this suggestion from the host down at Kenny's Castaways, and I had just enough money to my friends had other friends coming in. I couldn't stay with them, and I had enough money to buy a place to stay or put gas in my car and go home for Christmas. And so on the spur of the moment, there I headed south, came back to Atlanta. So there were two times in my life that I was going one direction, and on the spur of the moment, I changed directions.
Yeah, so we should probably, like, for the audience at home, for people who don't know, like, I have full disclosure, because we try to be transparent here. I have literally known Kodac Harrison my entire life. He was friends with my father from like since kindergarten. So that's how I know Kodac.
And it was his father that brought me back from California to play in his wedding. And after 2 weeks in Jackson, I played the wedding, and then I moved to West Virginia to become part of this communal community, hippie farm up there in West Virginia, where I could live very cheaply, and I could spend a lot of time playing guitar. So I moved back and forth between up there in Atlanta for about 3 years there in the late 70s, before going to New York and then moving back to Atlanta permanently. So that was influential. A lot of the people I knew some of the people I knew in New Orleans, musicians, etc., moved to be a part of that community up there in West Virginia. So I already knew people up there, and they were musicians, and I could continue to work on my craft in that situation. But anyway, yeah, I give his dad credit for bringing me back from California.
Yeah, well, there's also like another big thing for some people who are familiar with history and some that are not. You actually had a very bad accident, involving a car. That I remember, it was for a minute there, it looked like you weren't going to make it. In fact, you were, by all medical statistics, you weren't supposed to.
Yeah, the surgeon gave me 1 in 100 odds of surviving. I was talking to him 20 years later, and he brought up that again, and I said, what's this 1 in 100 stuff? He said, oh, that was just to survive. Your full recovery is like 1 in 1,000,000. So it was a close call there, and that changed my attitude in music. I had been trying to be a rock star during the 80s, and I decided I would focus more on acoustic the singer songwriter on my songs, and a little. Not, I didn't need to be a rock star anymore, and that's when I moved to Decatur to become part of a scene that Eddie's Attic was building, starting at the trackside, and then later when he opened Eddie's Attic in '92, I became part of that scene. And there were other people that became famous from that scene, Christian Bush and Sugarland and Sean Mullins, and of course John Mayer came through there too. So it was
The Indigo
quite a
Girls
scene. So,
weren't the Indigo Girls?
They were already kind of happening before that scene, but yeah, they were big fans of Eddie and vice versa, and they helped each other out in the early days. Uh, and I think that he gave them one of their first gigs at the trackside before it was a music venue. But their first gig in a music venue was at the Little Five Points Pub, which is also my first gig in Atlanta. I played there on a Friday night before I moved to Atlanta, and I did really well. They just passed the hat, the place was packed. And the music director told me, said, "You're one of the few people, solo artists, that could hold the audience here on a Friday night." And I was like, "Ooh, I'm moving to Atlanta and I'm going to be make it big time." Of course, everybody wanted to play there, and you couldn't get a gig there but every 3 months, 4 months or so. So it didn't quite turn out that way, but it did inspire me to move to close to Little Five Points because of the pub.
So tell us more about starting Java Monkey. Like, how did that all come about?
Um, well, I had. Like I said, they've been calling me a poet, critics had, and I started recording in the '90s. I had started recording spoken word and accepting the label of poet and getting more involved in the poetry scene. So I was asked by Dan Veach, who was the editor of the Atlanta Review, if I wanted to put together uh, a committee and to see if we could get grants and work with the poetry community in Atlanta. I had already started Java Monkey. I'm not sure exactly why I started, but I had been doing several songwriter, poets, things like at the DeFore Center down in East Atlanta at the Gravity Pub, and none of them lasted over 2 years compared to what Java. They were all monthlies. So I was sitting at the brick store, and uh, Philip Raines, that plays saxophone with me, suggested to one of the owners that you could get Kodac to do a poetry read. They just opened Java Monkey up, and they wanted to do something to get activities going there. They knew I had a big email list, mailing list at that time, that I had a name around Atlanta, and they thought it would be a good. So we worked out a deal, uh, and so I started a weekly poetry. I didn't necessarily think it would work, being right there on the street with no cover. I thought, ooh, boy, this could get kind of nasty, to say the least. It didn't happen that way. We were separated from commerce and conversation, which happened inside. We were on the patio. People listened, and it became very popular. In fact, one of the owners told me once, said your worst nights are better than any other night of the week, and your best nights set records. So we were definitely making it work for them as well as for us. And as a result of then becoming chairman of Poetry Atlanta, I put together a slam team. We got some grants to do that. It wasn't the first slam team from Atlanta, but it became the first continual slam team. We went to nationals every year after that, and it was just I did a lot of things. We became the host of the with the Decatur Book Festival, the local poets stage. One time, Turner South, which no longer exists, came in there and did some promotional things there, and gave and shot some stuff, and we did a lot of things there. But it lasted until it burned. Teresa Davis took it over from me after 15 and a half years, and she ran it the last couple of years in its existence. Because I thought, well, I've just done this long enough. I mean, I'd get other people to fill in when I went, to Europe or Boston or wherever I was on tour, to fill in for me. But I was pretty much there for every Sunday night for 15 and a half years.
So talk about, like, as far as, like, after you're like embracing the poetry thing, what's some more about your, because for as long as I've known you, you've always been like a big reader. Like you mentioned Steinbeck, but like, is there any, and of course, like Cohen and Waits, who are some of your other like influences as far as like writing
Well,
wise?
when I was living in California, uh, I was reading an interview with Bob Dylan in the Playboy. He said his favorite living author was Henry Miller. Henry Miller lived at Big Sur, right down the road from where I was. And I started reading Henry Miller, and he gave me a definition of an artist, somebody that would leave everything behind to be an artist. And he did that at age 33. He was like big time in the telegraph company or something in New York, had a big time job, and just left everything behind to move to Paris to be a writer, and starved for a while until he finally made it. And so I thought, oh, maybe that's what an artist is, somebody that's willing to leave everything behind in order to pursue their art. And hopefully I fit that definition over the years. So I read Henry Miller. In fact, when I was in New York, I read the Rossi Crucifixion, which is about his time in New York. And his writing was, it was almost like autobiographical, but it wasn't. It was fiction, but it was very close to his life. So I read Henry Miller, and then as a result of reading Henry Miller, he was constantly talking about other authors in his books, including, that's how I first learned about uh, Leaves of Grass, and when I first learned about Dostoevsky and many other authors who I pursued. And then I thought, well, I need to catch up because I've got no background in literary music. I got to read all the Nobel Prize winners. So I read Faulkner and of course and Hemingway and of course I had already read Steinbeck, and I just tried to catch up on reading because I felt deprived because I had no literary education. So I just stumbled into what I wanted to read. I wasn't directed, you need to read this or read that. I just kind of stumbled into it various ways. Like I said, I read a Playboy interview with Bob Dylan, or I was walking down the street and saw a bust of John Steinbeck when I was in Monterey, and his books are everywhere, and I read them all. So that's the kind of way I approach my reading, uh, and I've continued to do that because I love to read. You know. Now I like to read books, and I still like to read books. My wife reads the Kindle, but she, I got too many books everywhere. They clog up things. They take up space, But I mean, even behind me there's a whole shelf of books. But yeah, I love to read.
Do you have a favorite book, like an ultimate favorite book?
Oh, do I have a favorite book? Um, One of the few books I've read twice is The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. I don't know that I'd say that's my favorite book, but I certainly, uh, the fact that I read it twice, you could say that maybe. I don't think I'm trying to think, have I read any other book twice? Not sure about that. Oh, I think I read one of Henry Miller's twice too, because I wanted to go back and see what it was about that attracted me in the beginning. So I read Tropical Capricorn twice.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as a favorite book, I'd have to think about that for a while because I got lots of favorites.
You sound like me.
Yeah, I've been in that room. It's like it's just wall to wall books in there.
Yeah, my rooms used to be like that until I moved. It's dangerous.
Well, they do take up a lot of room. I admit, my wife, she's opposite of me. I'm kind of a cluttered person. I got lots of stuff around on the walls and everywhere, and she likes space. And just different attitudes, different opinions. I read
Opposites
somewhere
attract.
that where an artist said, "You a messy rooms mean you've got a lot of they're not. It's not a mess. They're potential ideas. So everywhere in books and whatnot, there's it's not a mess. Those are ideas, potential ideas."
With like the time you've spent, like you've done some teaching and you've spent years at Java Monkey, kind of nurturing other artists, what are the things like you've tried to like pass on or tips you've given to people, who are coming up?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that Java Monkey allowed people. Well, that was where Teresa Davis did her first reading. Was it Java Monkey, and give them a place to develop and grow. And I've done that in various different locations, mainly at Java Monkey, and I'm proud of that. To give other people who have dreams of being an artist a chance to develop in that sense. Um, Initially, I had tremendous stage fright. When I was in California in the Army, I'd go down to Monterey Peninsula College and do 3 songs every week at this little open mic they had, and I'd be terribly, I'd be shaking, my mouth would get dry, and I'd be and I've always suffered from stage fright. But once I get behind the mic, I've done it so much, I'm very comfortable in that respect. I'm comfortable here. Hopefully, you can tell that. I like to talk, you know. So you put me behind a microphone, I'll talk. So it works. Places like Java Monkey, where you're hosting, and I love to listen to other people at the same time and allow them to have a chance to develop. I've done that with music and with poetry somewhat. More with poetry because in those days it just really wasn't much going on uh, as far as spoken word in Atlanta. At the colleges, there was no place where a poet could make any kind of money unless they went to a college, and usually that was the academic poets, not the grassroots poets. So I wanted to start a place where grassroots poets could develop, and I had features uh, born in 19 different countries. And when I say born, actually born in that country, not second generation, as well as from pretty much every continent. Afraid we didn't get any penguins from Antarctica, but uh, and I like diversity. I like to hear different opinions. And Java Monkey gave as much to me as I gave to it. I mean, I learned so much from hearing all these people express their different emotions and opinions from all over this country and the world. Really, I was real fortunate there at Java Monkey. I'd have grassroots poets as young as 17, and I would have Natasha Trethewey, who was Pulitzer Prize winning poet laureate of the United States. She wasn't at that time, but she became that. Um, so I had a diverse, all styles were welcome, and I got to. And it was a learning experience for me as well as for anybody else. I treasure my time there, and I miss it tremendously. Even though I gave it up before it finished, because I thought it was time to pass it on.
And I had been there several times. It was a very, very diverse group from what I remember, and like it literally from like all from racial, from age wise, style wise. Like you had like I felt like it was like a great showcase for like Atlanta.
It was a very
And
diverse in every sense of the word. And we welcomed all. We wanted all people to feel comfortable there to express themselves, and the audience listened, and they would applaud everybody. Of course, the amount of applause you got would vary depending on whether they liked it or not. Uh, I was really amazed how well the audience listened. Once again, we were separate from commerce and conversation, which happened inside there, and people that the audience pretty much helped me keep people quiet. People start talking, the audience just start looking at them, and tell them to be quiet. So everybody listened, and I created this diversity by having diverse features. We had a feature that would get paid uh, every Sunday, not a lot of money, but a little bit, and which is kind of gave us a head up of a lot of other readings. Um, but I had a diverse group of features, which created a diverse audience, which I really liked. And it took about 6 months for it to get going. And the good thing about it was because the brick store started it and owned it, they really weren't worried about uh, me making a lot of money initially. I realized that most places are businesses, they have to survive. But the brick store wasn't worried about me helping them survive. So they supported me from 6 months, and it was wintertime, and I thought, oh, this place is going to die now. When it did just the opposite. They closed in a certain about half of the space we had outside to keep it warm, and people just bundle up and come in there. So it made up for a smaller but packed, very intimate crowd, and it took off after that, and survived all the seasons.
And for people who don't know that area, like for people outside of Atlanta, there's a place called the Brick Store Pub, which is maybe, would you say what, like about a not really a block, but like about like a half a block over from where Java Monkey is. If you go, actually, if you've ever seen, you ever seen the show Watchmen, you will actually see the Decatur Square.
Yeah,
And because it's there, it's doubling as like neo downtown Oklahoma, I think like Tulsa maybe, but yeah, that area you can see it, and it's the brick stores in this area that's kind of like got this weird kind of like roundabout, and
it started in '97, and I'm not going to try to promote the brick store too much, but it became unique because they had beers from all over the world and more of the craft beers, and they have no TVs in there. So typically a bar opens, they put Budweiser on tap, and they put up a lot of neon and a bunch of TVs and call it a sports bar or something. The brick store didn't do that. They did something different, new. Now it's become somewhat of a popular trend these days, especially with the all the craft beers, and you can get them at a lot of places. But they
the
were
brick
kind of
store is
unique
never hurting for business.
No, they do fine. They do fine. We don't need to promote them.
So they were ahead of their time, though.
Yes,
What you're
and I
saying.
think that's one of the things. They were ahead of their time, and they were responsible for me starting Java Monkey Speaks.
I'm curious to know like what trends or changes you've noticed since having been in Atlanta for so long. You've got to watch it evolve. Like on the, as far as like on the cultural scene from, I guess, what have you noticed from then to now? Obviously I'm sure there's like the town has gotten more professional as more of the kind of music and film industry has come in. Like how have, like, as far as like having been witness to all these singer songwriters and poets, have you noticed any particular trends over the
Well,
years?
one of the things the hip hop scene I'm not so connected with, but I feel like there was a kind of a connection between the slam poetry and rap or hip hop in that it was focused on words and in a certain rhythm. Uh, and at the same time, the singer songwriter scene, which started here in Decatur, was also focused more on words. Uh, because these were just a guy with an acoustic guitar or a girl, and they were singing songs. So you paid attention to what they were saying as opposed to. Um, so what has developed in Atlanta, and the spoken word scene developed also. I think the hip hop, the scene, the acoustic singer songwriter scene, and the spoken word scene are there's a little overlap there. Not a whole lot, but there's a little overlap, and that seems to be what has happened in Atlanta. Is it's become uh, more more of a scene that's developed, that's focused on words. Uh, I don't know whether that's totally true, but and people in the hip hop scene now is focused on rhythm, on beat, etc. But it's a combination there.
So, Billy, I'm sorry. Did you want to jump in here?
I didn't have anything right now. No. Sorry.
No, sorry. Okay. But, yeah, I mean, so you got, so now your current thing, you're doing, Kodac's Last Thursday of Poetry and Song. And it's
Yes.
kind of like a loose, it's kind of similar to Java Monkey in the sense that, like, it's kind of a, I don't want to say like a revolving door, but it's always kind of a, sometimes like it's like there's not always like a set, there'll be like a featured performer, but like different people can wander in depending on the
Well,
day.
it's a little more music oriented than Java Monkey. It's more akin to what I was doing at the Gravity Pub down in East Atlanta back in the day. I did that for 2 years, once a month. We had musicians and poets. And that's what we do here. It's not exactly an open mic, even though it changes. It's more like a variety show. It started as a COVID gig. I'd been off stage for 15 months, and that was the longest I'd been off stage since uh, 75. The last thing I did was win the Moth Slam in February, and then that shut down. Everything shut down. So a few years later, um, I was trying to figure out how I could get back on stage, and I talked to Nick out there who runs he also runs Pace Magazine. So he's involved in music as well as brewing beer uh, at Wild Heaven. He said, "Well, why don't you do something here?" And I was thinking, "Well, I got a birthday coming up. Maybe I'll do a birthday party there." And my birthday happened to be the last Thursday of April, so I did it, and it seemed to work, and it got me back on stage, and so I started doing it. We're in our third year now. I do it from April to October, which is the last one's coming up with my CD release. But and because I didn't want to go inside there because it's noisy and wet, and I wanted to be outside. And it was a perfect COVID gig because it was spread out, it was outside, and I felt like my audience is pretty conscientious about those things. And that was back in when things were pretty intense with COVID. And so I started there, and then he said, "Well, why don't you do that on a regular basis?" And I said, "Well, okay, we'll see what happens." So we're in our third year now. We're fixed to finish up third year with my. I'm releasing my new CD, "Love and Soul." There it is. Releasing that this last Thursday, which is the 26th. So I've been doing that, and basically, I've I will mention the fact that I've had what is called an essential tremor. It had nothing to do with my accident that Brandon was talking about years ago. But it enabled me. I had a hard time playing guitar or doing anything with my right hand, and I'm right-handed. So my guitar skills, because of lack of playing, had deteriorated a lot, and so over 10 or 12 years. And so I didn't feel like I could fill out a whole show by myself. So I invited other musicians and poets to come join me. And so it's become kind of a little happening thing. Rupert Fike is one of our featured poets every month, and Rupert is awesome. The audience loves him, and we've had different featured musicians. We've got the X-Pan Band coming up. And it's just become a happening. It's not a money gig. None of us getting rich there, but it's been a fun kind of get together, and it allowed me to get back on stage and play. Like I said, I don't have to play 2 or 3 sets of music. I can just do 3 or 4. I'm going to do 7 songs this coming, a little bit longer set since it's a CD release, but. Just a place where I can get back on stage and play a little music and do a little poetry and have some of my friends join in, and it's really become quite a scene. I'm really proud of what's happened there, and it's kind of kept me involved in things even at my age.
So is that, sorry, say that again, is that in Decatur?
That's in Avondale. Wild Heaven. There's 2 of them. I found this out. I didn't know there were 2 of them, and I think Carol Aiken, my first birthday party that I had there 3 years ago, she came all the way from Athens, and she ended up going to the wrong Wild Heaven. I didn't know there were 2 of them, so I stressed that it's in Avondale. There's
Yes.
one on the west side too, but this one is in Avondale. And we do it relatively early. The show goes from about 6 to 6:30 till about 9 or a little after, and so it's not like these gigs I used to do all the time from 10 to 2, and nobody would get there until about 11 or 12 o'clock, and that's if you get a little age on you, that doesn't work as well.
All right. So as we're coming up on the hour, tell people where they can find you online if they want to at you, as the kids
I've got
say.
a website. I don't really cater to it so much like I used to. And you can find me on Facebook. It's under Kodac Harrison, Kodac. I spelled it different from the beginning because it had nothing to do with the camera initially. And that later on in the 80s, later 80s, kept me from getting sued by Kodak camera. I don't think the camera company's in business anymore. Somebody bought them up or something, I'm not sure. But and there's another Kodak now, Kodak Black. He wanted to sue me a few years back because of the way I use it. But I told him, listen, this is the legal name I've had since the mid 80s. So you're going to have a little hard time with that. But if you do Google me, use Harrison with Kodak because otherwise, he's going to come up because he's more popular in the rap scene than I am. But yeah, you can go to KodacHarrison.com or you can look me up on Facebook, Instagram. I'm out there. You can find my music, I believe, on different places on YouTube, etc. You could buy my CDs on CD Baby, but I think CD Baby's not selling CDs anymore because CDs aren't as popular as they once were. And
Your stuff is
speaking of
also
which,
on Apple Music though, and I believe Amazon and with a few albums.
yeah, and hopefully we'll get the new one up there. Uh, I'm also planning to release next on my birthday. Next, it's going to be a big one. Next spring, I'm going to release an album, vinyl album like I did back in the '80s, and maybe I'll have copies of my first album as well as my new album too. It'll be a smaller version of the CD I'm putting out because albums don't hold as much music, and I'll put a couple of different songs on there too that are not going to be on the CD, but. I'm kind of excited about that, having a vinyl album, and maybe that'll be it. Maybe I'll.
Vinyl's cool again, man. It's in style. It's
Well, I heard that vinyl last year or year before, whatever, outsold CDs. So that's interesting. I guess if you're into vinyl, I mean, you're into vinyl. I mean, that's what you want.
oh yeah. I know a guy that has like a
Billy
base.
raised her hand there.
Yeah, I know a guy like a friend of mutual friend. For me and Billy, he's a guy that he's part of the Garfield's Crossing project, which is how we met. Like he's got a shelf full of albums, if I remember correctly, in his basement.
Oh, I have a lot, but mine are all in storage in
Uh,
Wisconsin. So hopefully they're okay. Because, yeah.
yes,
I used to have a big record collection too, and I had a friend in West Virginia who's had a house full of art and uh, vinyl, and it burned down totally. So I
Oh.
gave him all my records, except I saved up 50 of my favorites. But when I go up there, I can go down in his basement. He's got a turntable and everything, a pool table down there, and I can play DJ and pull out my old records and play them and stuff. It's kind of fun. Otherwise, they were just sitting in boxes. Because there were a big period there in the 80s and 90s, etc., when they weren't very popular uh, as they become more so now. So yeah, that's the future thing. And I've finished a memoir. If there are any publishers out there, just get in touch with me. I'm looking for a publisher now, obviously. Uh, but got to create. So I'm gonna, and I've had shows of my photography and my abstract art. I've had several shows of the art and sold a bunch of paintings. So I'm trying to be creative as I move into the last stages of my existence.
I love that. I love
well,
that you're doing other art. That's cool.
oh yeah, he's actually, and you can see some of his art on his website. And there's a link. I actually filmed Kodak at a art show, and there's a trailer we can put up that shows some of his art alongside of another artist that I've actually filmed as well, Russell Carter Jones. They did
Yeah,
a show
Russell's
together.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, his stuff's amazing, and you can see both Kodak's and Russell's stuff. We'll put links to that up on our social so people can see that. And you
Cool.
can also, and you can see it on your website, kodacharrison.com. So, but yeah, man, thank you for coming out, and good luck with the new album.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice meeting you.
It was very nice meeting you. In fact, Brandon and I talked too much. You said you talk more.
Me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I,
you.
I do talk a lot. Yes. Yep. I can hold my own.
I know you can. I bet you can.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. For a full list of our podcasts, go to carcuttamedia.com/podcasts. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2023 by Carcutta Media, LLC. All rights reserved.